Imagine this. You're standing at the edge of a dense forest, somewhere deep in rural China. The air is cold, unnaturally cold for the season, and there's a stillness that wraps itself around you like a shroud. The sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the uneven ground. You take a step forward, your boots crunching on brittle leaves, and suddenly you feel it. A presence. Not a sound, not a sight, just a shift in the air, as though the forest itself is holding its breath. You turn back toward the village you left behind, but it's no longer in view. The narrow dirt path that led you here seems to have vanished, swallowed by the forest. You're alone now, or at least you think you are. You try to shake the feeling, but something isn't right. That presence, it's closer now, watching, waiting. This is the kind of moment that folklore warns us about. The kind of moment when the stories whispered around a flickering candle become real. In China, these stories aren't just entertainment. They're warnings. Warnings of spirits that don't rest, of curses that cling to the living like a second skin, of ancient rituals that should never be disturbed. Take the tale of a man who stayed too long in a haunted village, ignoring the locals' pleas for him to leave before nightfall. He returned days later, his hair turned completely white, and his voice lost forever, as if the forest had stolen it. Or the legend of the spectral woman in red, said to appear on the roads of Beijing late at night, her face obscured by a veil, always asking the same chilling question: "Have you seen my child?" To answer her is to invite her wrath, and to ignore her is to feel her icy breath on the back of your neck as you walk away. But these are just stories, right? Or so you tell yourself. After all, in the age of technology and reason, ghosts and spirits are relics of the past, something to laugh about at a dinner table or forget as you scroll through your phone. But what if they aren't? What if, right now, as you sit in the comfort of your room, the faint creak you hear isn't just the house settling? What if the chill you feel on your skin isn't just the draft from the window? China, a land of emperors and warriors, poets and philosophers, is also a land where the boundaries between the living and the dead blur in ways that defy explanation. Beneath the surface of its bustling cities and tranquil countryside lies a history that refuses to remain buried. A history filled with sorrow, betrayal, and revenge. And sometimes, that history reaches out, touching the present in ways that send shivers down the spine. Think about the Forbidden City, a sprawling palace complex at the heart of Beijing, where emperors once ruled with absolute power. By day, it's a marvel of ancient architecture, a tourist attraction flooded with visitors eager to glimpse a piece of China's imperial past. But by night, it's something else entirely. Guards whisper of strange sounds, the rustle of silk robes in empty corridors, the faint echoes of laughter where no one should be. One guard swears he saw a woman in ornate Qing dynasty attire gliding across the courtyard, her face obscured by shadows, her feet never touching the ground. And what of the remote mountains of Sichuan province, where villagers still leave offerings at the base of an ancient tree said to house a vengeful spirit? The story goes that a young bride was abandoned at the altar centuries ago, and in her despair, she hanged herself from that very tree. Now, her ghost is said to wander the area, appearing as a beautiful woman who lures unsuspecting men into the forest, never to be seen again. These are not mere legends. These are echoes of something older, something darker, something that refuses to fade away with time. And tonight, we're bringing you 5 of the most chilling true ghost stories from China. Stories that will take you from the haunted streets of Beijing to the cursed rivers of the countryside. Stories that will make you question what you thought you knew about the world. So, dim the lights, settle in, and listen closely. But be warned, once you hear these stories, you might find it hard to shake the feeling that you're no longer alone. And the next time you feel a cold breeze or hear a faint whisper, remember, sometimes the past doesn't stay in the past. Title: The Ghost Bride. In a remote village nestled in the mountains of southern China, life seemed untouched by the rush of modernity. The air was crisp, carrying the faint aroma of incense from the temple at the edge of the village. Lanterns swayed gently in the misty breeze, casting faint, flickering light over the narrow dirt roads. It was a place where tradition reigned supreme, where ancient customs held firm, and where whispers of the supernatural were never far away. This is the story of Wei Jun, a young farmer in his mid-20s. He was known for his quiet demeanor and a kindness that endeared him to the villagers. But Wei Jun carried a heavy burden. His family's name had fallen into disrepute after the untimely death of his father, and the shame of their lineage followed him like a shadow. One autumn evening, as the harvest moon hung low in the sky, a mysterious man arrived at Wei Jun's modest home. He was dressed in fine robes, his face obscured by the wide brim of his hat. The man introduced himself as a matchmaker, claiming he had found a suitable bride for Wei Jun. The proposal seemed too good to be true. The bride, the matchmaker said, came from a wealthy family, but had suffered a tragedy that left her unable to wed anyone from her own social class. She was willing to marry Wei Jun to avoid the shame of remaining unmarried. Wei Jun hesitated. The offer was extraordinary, almost unbelievable. But the promise of wealth and honor for his struggling family was too tempting to refuse. The matchmaker set the wedding date for the following week, insisting that the ceremony take place at night. A tradition, he claimed, to honor the bride's grieving family. As the day approached, unease settled over the village. The elders muttered about the matchmaker, who seemed to have appeared out of thin air. The bride's family, they said, had not been seen or heard of before. But Wei Jun, blinded by hope, dismissed the warnings. He prepared for the wedding with a mixture of trepidation and anticipation. The night of the wedding arrived, cloaked in an eerie fog that clung to the ground like a veil. The village square was transformed into a scene of subdued celebration. Red lanterns cast an otherworldly glow, their light barely piercing the mist. The bride appeared, carried in a traditional red sedan chair. Her face was hidden behind an intricate red veil, and she spoke not a word. As the ceremony commenced, strange occurrences began to unfold. The village dogs, usually so lively, fell silent, their ears pinned back as they watched the proceedings with wide, fearful eyes. Shadows seemed to flicker and stretch unnaturally in the dim lantern light, and a cold wind swept through the square, chilling the guests despite the warmth of the evening. After the vows were exchanged, the newlyweds were escorted to Wei Jun's home. The guests left quickly, their unease growing with each passing moment. In the quiet of the night, a neighbor claimed to hear faint laughter echoing through the village, laughter that sounded both joyful and mournful, as though it came from a place beyond the living. The next morning, the village awoke to chaos. Wei Jun's house stood eerily silent. When concerned neighbors entered, they found the bridal chamber in disarray. Wei Jun was gone, and the only trace of him was his wedding robe, folded neatly on the bed. The bride, too, had vanished. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said Wei Jun had angered the spirits by marrying a ghost, while others believed he had been claimed by the bride to join her in the afterlife. The elders, steeped in ancient knowledge, performed rituals to appease the spirits, but the village was never the same. Wei Jun's disappearance remained a mystery, a chilling reminder of the dangers of ignoring the whispers of the past. But the story doesn't end there. Decades later, villagers claimed to see a young man dressed in a groom's robe wandering the forest at the edge of the village. He moved as though searching for something, or someone, his face pale, his eyes hollow. Those who saw him never dared to approach, and the sightings only added to the legend of the ghost bride. So, I ask you, would you dare accept a bride if you weren't sure she was alive? And if you did, could you live with the consequences of what might come next? Title: The Forbidden City's Phantom. Beneath the sprawling skyline of modern Beijing, the Forbidden City rises like a sentinel of history. For centuries, its crimson walls and golden rooftops have been the symbol of Imperial China's unmatched power and grandeur. But as the sun sets and the bustling city streets grow quiet, a different side of the palace emerges. Under the pale glow of the moon, the vast courtyards of the Forbidden City seem to stretch endlessly into shadow. The faint whispers of the past seem to echo between its ancient walls, footsteps that no one can trace, faint sobs carried by the wind, and the overwhelming feeling that someone or something is watching. Tourists who visit during the day are captivated by the Forbidden City's grandeur, its intricately carved stone lions, the vibrant murals, and the seemingly infinite corridors that once housed the Ming and Qing emperors. But those who remain after sunset tell a different story, a story of unease and unexplained encounters. It was a cold autumn evening when a night guard named Liu first heard her. He was patrolling one of the quieter sections of the palace complex, his flashlight casting long, dancing shadows across the stone pathways. The air was still, the kind of silence that makes every sound, every rustle of leaves, every faint creak, seem unnaturally loud. And then he heard it, a low, mournful cry. At first, he thought it was the wind, but the sound grew louder, more distinct. It was the unmistakable sound of a woman weeping. His heart raced as he followed the sound, his footsteps echoing in the empty courtyard. When he reached the source, his flashlight revealed nothing but an empty pathway leading to the Hall of Supreme Harmony. The cries had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed heavily on his chest. Liu was not the only one. Over the years, countless guards have reported seeing her, a woman dressed in flowing, ancient robes. Some say she appears near the Meridian Gate, her figure faint and translucent, gliding across the cobblestone path. Her head is always bowed, her hair cascading down to obscure her face, and from her lips come heart-wrenching cries that seem to carry the sorrow of centuries. One guard, who dared to approach her, claimed that as he reached out, her figure dissolved into the night air, leaving behind only the faint scent of incense. Another reported seeing her reflection in a nearby pond, but when he turned to look, the water was still, and he was utterly alone. The locals have their theories. Some believe she is the spirit of a concubine who met a tragic end, perhaps falsely accused of treason, perhaps betrayed by jealous rivals. Others say she is a servant who was caught in the crossfire of palace intrigue and lost her life in the labyrinth of secrets that defined imperial rule. Whoever she was, her sorrow lingers, refusing to fade with time. Then there is the story of Mei, a young tourist who visited the Forbidden City during a special nighttime tour. Like many visitors, she carried her phone, eager to capture every detail of the majestic palace. As her group moved through the shadowy courtyards, May lingered behind, captivated by the stillness of the Hall of Mental Cultivation. She raised her phone to take a picture of the corridor bathed in the moonlight. When she reviewed the photo later that evening, her blood ran cold. Standing in the frame was a faint figure, a woman in flowing robes, her face obscured by her long hair. May hadn't seen anyone there when she took the photo, and no one else on the tour had reported seeing a woman. The photo quickly spread online, sparking debates among skeptics and believers. Some argued it was a trick of the light. Others swore it was undeniable proof of the paranormal. But for May, the encounter was deeply personal. She confessed that during the tour, she had felt a peculiar chill that seemed to follow her, an invisible presence that sent shivers down her spine. The Forbidden City has always been more than just a palace. It was a world of its own, a place where emperors ruled with absolute power, where lives were shaped and destroyed in the blink of an eye. Within its walls, joy and sorrow were deeply intertwined, and betrayal often walked hand in hand with loyalty. Perhaps it is this history, the weight of untold stories and unresolved emotions, that has left its mark on the palace. Those who work within the Forbidden City will tell you that it is impossible to truly be alone there, even when the courtyards are empty, and the only sound is the distant rustle of leaves. They say that, late at night, if you stand near the Hall of Supreme Harmony and listen closely, you might hear it too. The faint, mournful cries of the weeping woman. And if you do, resist the urge to follow, for what you might find is not meant for the eyes of the living. What do you think? Is the Forbidden City truly haunted, or are these tales the product of overactive imaginations? If you've ever walked through its courtyards, have you felt an unexplainable chill, as if the past itself were brushing against you? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, some places are best admired from a distance. Title: The Haunted School Dormitory. In a small forgotten town nestled in one of China's remote provinces, there stands a boarding school whose crumbling walls hide more than just the passing years. With its weathered facade and broken windows, the school's dormitory feels like a place abandoned by time itself, a place that echoes with a history that refuses to stay buried. The peeling paint, the flickering lights, and the quiet hum of the airless hallways all create a sense of dread, as if the building itself is holding its breath, waiting. Students who have stayed here often speak in hushed tones about the thing that haunts them, something that comes when the clock strikes 3 a.m. And if you ask them about the knocking, if you dare, most won't answer. Some say it's a joke, a mere coincidence, but the few who have dared to open their door in response will never forget what they saw. It was a cold winter night when May, a young student, first heard the knocking. She had recently transferred to the boarding school, and the damp, musty air in the dormitory made it difficult to sleep. The school was isolated, miles away from the nearest town, and the only sounds in the dead of night were the wind howling through the cracks in the walls and the occasional rustle of something moving in the darkness. May was lying in her bed, the thin sheets barely enough to keep the chill at bay. Around 3 a.m., she was suddenly jolted awake. A soft but unmistakable knocking echoed through the room, followed by a deep, unsettling silence. The sound came from the hallway outside her door. Knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp raps on the wooden door, each one more insistent than the last. May's heart skipped a beat. She lay there in the dark, wide-eyed, the noise freezing her in place. She could hear nothing else. The wind had died down. The usual creaks of the old building were absent. Just the knocking. It continued for what felt like an eternity, slow and deliberate. Her breath hitched as the reality of the situation settled in. Was it one of her classmates playing a prank? Or something else? The knocking stopped abruptly, but May didn't sleep a wink for the rest of the night. The next morning, she tried to shake off the experience, attributing it to an overactive imagination or a trick of the wind. But that evening, as the darkness crept in again, the same unease settled over her. This time, she wasn't alone. One by one, her dorm mates confided in her that they had heard the knocking too. Some claimed to have heard whispers in the hallways, soft voices that would call their names in the dark. The whispers never sounded human, though. They were distant, disembodied, and faintly distorted, like the voice of someone trapped behind a wall. May's friends spoke of hearing the knocking every night at 3 a.m., like clockwork. Some said the knocks were followed by the sound of shuffling feet, others by an unsettling scrape against the floor. They all said the same thing. It was as though something or someone was walking the halls, searching for someone to answer. The terror of it was overwhelming. Despite the fear, no one dared leave their rooms to investigate. The few students brave enough to open their doors were met with nothing but silence. Still, the knocking persisted. It wasn't until one night, when the knocking came again, that things took a darker turn. Chen, a sophomore, was the first to crack. Desperate to understand the strange phenomenon, he decided to confront whatever it was head-on. Armed with only his phone's flashlight, he opened the door at exactly 3 a.m. What he saw, or rather didn't see, would haunt him for the rest of his life. The hallway was completely empty. No one was there. But just as he was about to close the door, he felt it. A cold, clammy hand brush against the back of his neck. He spun around, but there was no one there. The hallway remained still, eerily silent. The knocking had stopped. Chen quickly shut the door and locked it, his heart racing. But the next morning, something far more disturbing awaited him. When he went to class, a fellow student, Lee, approached him with a look of fear in her eyes. "I heard you went to the door last night," she said, voice trembling. "You weren't the only one. I opened mine, too." Lee's voice faltered as she pulled down her sleeve, revealing deep, dark claw marks running across her forearm. They looked fresh, as if something had raked its nails down her skin. It wasn't the first time someone had been hurt. Other students began to show signs of similar injuries: scratch marks, bruises, and the unmistakable sensation of being watched. It didn't stop with the marks. Over the next few days, more students went missing. At least 3 students disappeared within the span of a week. Some say they heard the knocking in the middle of the night, and when they went to answer, they were never seen again. Others claimed that their rooms were empty when they woke up, as if they had vanished into thin air, leaving only the faint scent of something rotten in the air. The school's administration could not explain the bizarre occurrences. Teachers who had worked there for years refused to talk about it, as if some unspoken rule prevented them from acknowledging what was happening. Students were terrified, and the ones who had experienced the knocking, or worse, began to leave in droves, each one swearing never to return. Those who stayed claimed the knocking continued, night after night, but no one ever dared to answer it again. Some say the spirit of the dormitory had taken its revenge on those who dared to open their doors. Others believe the building itself is cursed, a place where the past and present collide, and the dead are still seeking something, perhaps someone, to open the door and let them in. If you were in that dormitory, would you dare to open the door when you heard the knocking at 3 a.m.? Or would you lie there in the dark, praying that it would stop? Let us know what you would do in the comments below. And remember, some doors should never be opened, no matter how loud the knocking becomes. Title: The Cursed Mirror of Suzhou. Deep within the city of Suzhou, famous for its ancient gardens and serene canals, there exists a quiet, tucked-away house that holds a secret. A family heirloom passed down through generations, whispered about in hushed tones among locals. This heirloom is no ordinary piece of furniture. It is a mirror, an ornate, gilded mirror, its surface so smooth and glassy it almost looks as though it could swallow your reflection. But it is not simply a reflection you see. The mirror is said to reveal more than just the present. Some say it reveals the past, others, the future, and for some, it shows the dead. In a dimly lit bedroom, the air heavy with the smell of old wood and dust, the mirror stood solemnly on the wall, surrounded by delicate tapestries that faded over time. The light from a single candle flickered, casting shadows that danced on the mirror's surface, making it appear as if the glass was alive. For generations, the Chen family had passed down this mirror, and each owner would speak of the strange things they saw within it. But no one ever spoke of it openly. It was considered a curse, and those who looked too long risked something far worse than merely seeing their own reflection. The story begins with a young woman, Li Mei, who had recently inherited the mirror. Her grandmother had passed away in her sleep not long ago, and Li Mei found herself drawn to the heirloom, a final connection to the woman who had raised her. The old woman had always warned her to avoid the mirror, but Li Mei, curious and determined, could not resist. She had heard the whispers, the stories of what the mirror had shown her ancestors, visions of death, of terrible omens, of things no one should have ever seen. But she was not afraid, or so she thought. One evening, Li Mei found herself alone in the bedroom. The house was still, save for the wind rattling the shutters. The mirror called to her, its surface gleaming in the candlelight as if beckoning her to look closer. With a deep breath, she approached it, her reflection staring back at her, pale, uncertain. But then, the glass shimmered. For a split second, her reflection seemed to blur, fading into the shadows, replaced by the image of a woman. It was her grandmother. Her face, once kind and full of life, was now an image of sorrow. The old woman's eyes, filled with warning, met Li Mei's. "Don't look again," the grandmother's voice seemed to echo, though her lips did not move. The words vibrated in Li Mei's chest, sending chills down her spine. Fear gripped her heart, and she stepped back. But something in the mirror tugged at her, a pull that she could not resist. She found herself leaning in once more, her hands trembling as she stared at the image. But it wasn't her grandmother anymore. The reflection shifted, and for the first time, Li Mei saw something that made her breath catch. The mirror showed a room, one that seemed to be her own but from another time, and there, lying lifeless on the floor, was her own body. She could see herself, pale, unmoving, her hair splayed out around her like a black halo. Her reflection grinned back at her, cold and mocking, as if it had been waiting all this time for her to notice. The voice returned, clearer this time, urgent, as if pleading for Li Mei to listen. "You have seen enough. Don't look again." The mirror seemed to hum with a low, unsettling sound, as if it was alive with the spirits of those who had gazed into it before her. But Li Mei, unable to resist the pull, did what she was warned not to do. She looked deeper. At that moment, the mirror began to crack, a sharp echoing sound that filled the room. Li Mei felt the air grow cold, a chill that sank into her bones. The reflection twisted and distorted, becoming something otherworldly. The room seemed to close in on her, the walls shrinking, and she could hear whispers, voices of people long dead. Her grandmother's voice was lost among the others, drowned in a cacophony of wailing and cries for help. She reached out, drawn toward the mirror, as if it held the answers to everything she had ever wondered. But when her fingers touched the glass, the world around her went dark. The next morning, Li Mei's family found the room eerily still. The mirror had shattered completely, its golden frame splintered, and the glass shattered in a million jagged pieces. But it wasn't just the mirror that had changed. Li Mei was gone. There was no trace of her in the house. Her bed was empty, the covers still as if untouched. The only sign that she had been there was a single handprint on the broken mirror, smeared with something dark. The police were called, but they found nothing. No signs of struggle, no indication that she had been taken. Her disappearance was labeled as mysterious, but those who knew the story of the cursed mirror suspected the truth. Li Mei had crossed a line that no one should ever cross. The mirror had claimed her, just as it had claimed those before her. Years passed, and the house eventually fell into disrepair. The mirror, now a pile of broken glass and shards of memory, was left forgotten. But some say it still exists, hidden away in an old wooden box, waiting for someone else to be drawn to its pull. And those who live in the old family house now speak of strange happenings, of voices late at night, whispers that can't be traced. They say if you listen closely, you can hear Li Mei's voice, warning anyone who will listen, don't look again. Would you dare to look into a cursed mirror if it showed you the past or the future? Would you be able to resist the temptation of seeing beyond the veil, even knowing the cost? Let us know in the comments below what you think of this cursed heirloom. But remember, some reflections were never meant to be seen. Title: The River Spirit's Curse. In the remote mountains of southern China, nestled in a quiet valley, there lies a river, its waters dark, almost unnaturally still. The villagers living nearby have long whispered about its cursed past. It's a place that, though serene in appearance, harbors an ancient and restless spirit. The river's waters have seen countless generations come and go, but it is the river's legacy of sorrow and death that lingers, like a shadow that no amount of sunlight can erase. Locals speak in hushed tones, warning their children not to wander near its banks, especially at night. The village, built along the winding course of the river, feels timeless. It's a place where history seems to stand still, nestled between towering cliffs that echo with the whispers of past tragedies. Wooden houses dot the landscape, each one carrying the weight of countless stories. But it is the river that holds the deepest secrets. Its murky waters have swallowed the pain of those who dared to disturb its peace, and those who have lived to tell the tale are few. As night falls, the river takes on an eerie quality. The air grows colder, and the water, dark as ink, seems to ripple even when there is no wind. The villagers have grown accustomed to the unsettling quiet, but they never forget the warnings passed down from their elders. Do not go near the river at night, they say. The spirit of the woman who died there is still waiting for someone to join her. Among the children who grew up with these warnings was a young boy named Wei. He was different from the others, brave, or perhaps foolish. Despite the constant whispers about the cursed river, Wei felt an unexplainable pull toward it. His friends, who grew up hearing the same warnings, avoided the river as they would any dangerous place. But Wei couldn't resist. Something about the river called to him, and on one fateful evening, as dusk turned to night, he found himself standing alone at the riverbank. It was there, as the last light of day disappeared, that he saw her, the woman by the river. Her figure was ghostly pale, her long hair black as night, drifting in the water like tendrils of silk. She was crouched by the water's edge, her face hidden in her hands as she sobbed softly, her body trembling with every heart-wrenching cry. Wei felt a chill creep up his spine as he watched her, unsure whether he should approach or retreat. But his feet moved of their own accord, pulling him closer to her. And just as he was about to speak, to ask if she was all right, she lifted her head, revealing her face. Her eyes were wide open, unblinking, empty, and dark as the river itself. Wei froze in place, paralyzed by her gaze, his throat tightening as the air around him seemed to freeze. And then, before his very eyes, the woman vanished, dissolving into the air like smoke, her sobs fading into the night. One moment she was there, and the next, she was gone. The river was still again, as if nothing had ever happened. Wei stood there for what felt like an eternity, his heart pounding in his chest. As he turned to leave, the strange occurrences began. At first, it was small things, soft whispers at the edge of his hearing, like the river itself was calling to him. Then came the lanterns, floating on the surface of the water, bright, flickering lights that moved with no clear source. They would drift along the river's edge, only to disappear when approached, as if teasing him. But the worst part came later, when the screams began. At first, they were faint, distant cries that could have been mistaken for the wind. But as the days passed, the cries grew louder, more desperate, more anguished. It was as if the woman's sorrow was coming to life, seeking someone to hear it, to understand it. But it wasn't just the sounds. At night, when Wei would lie in bed, he could feel her presence, like an icy breath on the back of his neck. He could hear her voice, not just in the night, but in his dreams. The woman's face, twisted in grief, would appear in his sleep, her hollow eyes staring at him as she whispered a single word over and over again, "Join me." Each time Wei would wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, unable to shake the image of her. The lanterns would continue to flicker by the river, and the cries would grow more frequent, more desperate. But the worst was yet to come. As Wei's dreams became darker, his health began to deteriorate. He stopped eating, grew pale, and his body trembled constantly, as if it was haunted by the touch of the cold water. His parents noticed the change and took him to the village healer, who could find no physical ailment, no illness to explain his decline. But the healer knew the signs. She had heard of the curse of the river, of the spirit that claimed those who ventured too close. One night, as Wei lay in bed, his eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, he saw her again. The woman from the river, standing at the foot of his bed, her long, wet hair hanging in front of her face. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but it echoed in his mind, clear as day. "Come to the river," she said. "It's time for you to join me. The river calls for you." Wei could no longer resist. His body, weakened by the constant torment, moved of its own accord. He stumbled out of bed, his eyes vacant, and walked out into the night. His parents awoke to the sound of the door creaking open, but when they rushed to stop him, it was too late. He had already gone. The villagers searched the river banks for days, calling his name, but he was never found. The story of Wei became just another chapter in the dark history of the river. The lanterns continued to float, the cries echoed through the village, and the spirit of the woman remained. Some say she is still waiting, searching for the next soul to claim. And the river, still dark, still silent, continues to beckon those who dare to wander too close. Have you ever heard a river whisper your name? Have you felt a pull, an inexplicable urge to go where you know you shouldn't? If you've had an experience like this, share it with us in the comments. And remember, sometimes the waters are best left undisturbed. And so, we come to the end of tonight's chilling journey through the dark and mysterious corners of China, where ancient traditions intertwine with restless spirits and eerie forces that refuse to be forgotten. From the depths of haunted villages to the haunted halls of the Forbidden City, we've heard stories that linger in the air like whispers, tales that refuse to let go. These are not just stories. They are warnings, each one a reminder that the line between the living and the dead is thinner than we might like to believe. We started with the tragic tale of the Ghost Bride, a spirit trapped in a marriage that was never meant to be. A young man, unknowingly bound to a ghost, finds his life consumed by a force far stronger than any love could ever be. A wedding night that should have been filled with joy ends in a mystery that no one in the village can explain. And still, her presence lingers in the hearts of those who dare to speak of her. Then, we ventured into the heart of Beijing, where the Forbidden City, an ancient seat of power, still houses more than just relics of China's imperial past. Guards and tourists alike report sightings of a weeping woman lost in her grief. And though her form has no flesh, her presence is undeniable. A shadow captured in a photo is all that remains, but the fear is very much real. The story of the haunted school dormitory came next, a place where the walls have absorbed the terror of students who heard knocking at 3 a.m. What began as strange noises escalated into an encounter with something far darker. One student opened the door, only to be found unconscious, as if the very essence of fear had left its mark on them. A place where time and nightmares seemed to blur together. In the darkened room of a house in Suzhou, we encountered the Cursed Mirror, an heirloom passed down through generations, but with a deadly secret. It was said to reveal not just reflections, but the faces of the dead, pulling the living into their own tragic fate. One woman, drawn to the mirror's call, was given a warning she could not resist. She vanished, leaving only the fractured mirror behind, cracked by the very spirit it had once shown. And finally, we ventured into the deep, dark waters of a river, haunted by a sorrowful spirit. A young boy, ignoring the warnings of the villagers, encountered a woman whose cry echoed across time. The river, forever linked to tragedy, claimed his life in the end, pulling him into its depths, leaving nothing but the echoes of his torment. 5 stories, each filled with dread and mystery, stories that linger long after the lights are out. Which one sent shivers down your spine? Was it the cursed river, the Ghost Bride, or perhaps the weeping woman of the Forbidden City? Let us know in the comments below. Share your thoughts, your fears, and your theories. Don't forget to like this video, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you won't miss the next unsettling journey into the unknown. And remember, this is just the beginning. Next time, we'll take a journey into the darker corners of Japan, where the paranormal stories are even more disturbing. Ghosts that vanish into thin air, spirits that whisper from beyond, and mysteries so chilling, you'll question the very fabric of reality. Stay tuned if you dare. Until then, keep your lights on, and always remember, some stories are best left untold, but we'll keep telling them anyway.